I was born in 1956. My sense of duty was clear from an early age, writing, "The definition of a man is someone who will never let anyone sway him from the truth. He is someone who will stand up for right and has control over his body and speech. He is determined and has no end of courage. But above all, he is someone who sees that his life has a purpose in it, and he must make the best of what he has and of his only life on earth." At secondary school, I acted, played sport, won medals, broke records, and gave 100% in all I did. So eager was I on the school 220-mile pilgrimage from Staffordshire to the south coast that the other students gave me a speed limit. I organised a marathon raising money for cancer research and regular coach trips for my fellow students to the theatre. I took a gap year, gaining a teaching job, arranged camps for disadvantaged children, outings to the theatre, to York's Viking Centre and to Chester Zoo, visited the elderly housebound and patients in the local mental health hospital and took them out. Not many 17-year-olds made such choices, and it bemused my family, particularly when I brought them for tea back to my parents. I did voluntary work as a Samaritan while a student, helping the suicidal, nervously handling the night shift alone. As a Christian, troubled by world poverty, I lived frugally, sleeping on the floor for 4 years. I urged my university college to support charitable work and founded the Third World Fair trade shop that still operates today, and rented out a city centre shop over Christmas to boost sales. The college had to apologise for their attempt to airbrush my role as a founder from history in issuing a correction to their article in Durham First. I worked with the International Voluntary Service and voluntary services overseas, working in the then Czechoslovakia, in a women's refuge, and helping after the Italian earthquake. Aged 18, travelling to communist Prague, presented me with the opportunity to smuggle Bibles to persecuted Christians. The Bible Society gave me 20 Bibles in Czech that I bore safely to a theological professor, though not without some terrifying moments on the train into the country when police filled the carriage and almost searched my rucksack. He gave me this engraved Last Supper in gratitude. The following year I volunteered with the Christian Mission to the Communist world, and from a base in Vienna travelled to Romania, the former Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria and the former Yugoslavia, smuggling materials to the Christian communities who were suffering under communism. It was high tension at the borders, with rubles sewn into my trousers. I had car parts as well, literature and medical supplies stuffed behind the car door panels in the false bottoms of boxes and suitcases. Once safely in the country, there were anxious rendezvous arrangements at dead of night and drop-offs into cellars, through windows, and sometimes directly to groups of Christians meeting clandestinely, huddled in hidden locations. After graduating, I hitchhiked from Bulgaria to India to work with Mother Teresa. It was a hair-raising journey. I was picked up by car thieves in Bulgaria, stranded near midnight in Istanbul, experienced dodging bandits through remote parts of Turkey, was tear-gassed and caught in the riots in Tehran, stranded in the early hours in a desert in Iran, stopped by machine-gun-carrying police in Kabul, having inadvertently breached a curfew, and found myself the only Westerner on a bus travelling across Afghanistan. I slept by a dust track on the Pakistan border and was nearly murdered in India. My sheltered upbringing hadn't prepared me for any such events, and even now I am incredulous that I survived it all. In the year that followed, I was to contract bacillary dysentery 3 times and amoebic dysentery twice. I was hospitalised with food poisoning and caught scabies. However, there was a much greater challenge. Nothing could have prepared me for the shocking contrast between the rich and the poor. I worked initially in the home for the dying and saw horrific sights. One man, so desperately ill, had had his bottom gnawed away by rats, cockroaches and infection. He was writhing in pain. Then the floods hit West Bengal and the Hooghly River overflowed its banks, and I waded in waist-high water through the slums and took relief supplies out to the villages. Meanwhile, the wealthy remained unaffected. After the relief work, I launched a project to train Mother Teresa's adult orphans in ceramic production and moved to live in the worst slum area where we were to build the workshop. Most movingly, I managed to save the life of a child, Buru, dying asleep on Howrah station, surrounded by his faeces and urine. Also a young woman, Muani, who I lifted from the pavement. Both I bore to the local hospital and saw healed and rehabilitated. I arranged orthopaedic surgery for Gary, a boy from the slums with a disabled arm. I began to run a small school and a first aid post. The needs were immense and the help given just a tiny drop in an ocean of suffering. At Christmas, the Missionaries of Charity invited the poor to share food. The year in India had a profound effect on me. Having raised the money to support all my charitable work in Calcutta, I was able to donate the remaining £15,500 into a trust fund with the Church of North India to support a woman's TB hospital in Howrah. I was also able to send a young man, whose wife tragically died in childbirth, enough money to establish a small company, here restoring the cross for the Anglican cathedral. The help enabled him to go on and provide for his own and extended family, recently even being able to purchase land and build a home for them all. Movingly, he named his son after me. I was ordained in 1981 and served my first curacies in Bradford. I hit headlines, having cast a young black boy to play St Francis in a new musical with which I was involved.
Jonathan Blake, you're here tonight after the end of 8 or 9 months rehearsals. What's it all about?
Well, the musical's about Francis, who lived in the 13th century, a saint that we often think about as talking to birds and talking to animals, and we've discovered in doing the musical that there's a lot more to him than that.
He encountered a leper. He'd always been terrified and repulsed by lepers, but on this particular occasion he was drawn like a magnet towards the leper, managed to overcome his feelings of revulsion and actually embraced and kissed the leper and took off some of his clothes and clothed the leper who was cold.
Well, Friday evening, Paul Walker went along to see it.
Joy is the one word I'd use to sum up the play. Sheer joy radiated from the faces of the cast, most of whom had been plucked from youth clubs and church groups.
I slept on the streets to raise awareness of the world's homeless, and then travelled to Kenya to attend a world conference on religion and peace.
Well, Jonathan's back in this country after his journey safe and sound. Jonathan, how did the conference go?
It was a marvellous experience. About 600 people from 60 different countries and from all the world's major religions gathering together. And we felt that so many young people were used in armies of destruction to carry out adult political games and thoughts, that it was very important for young people to be on the forefront of peace initiatives as well. And so we requested that the organisation be serious about the involvement of young people and include in their governing and executive boards a representation from the youth. The young people elected a youth coordinator, which happened to be myself, and then the main organisation nominated me to be on their governing and executive board.
The escape of my collection of snakes also drew attention, as did my colourful clergy shirts, and that I had my ear pierced. However, my interfaith, peace work and social concern ruffled feathers, and though loved and supported by parishioners, I moved from Bradford to Rochester. Being appointed editor of the community newsletter provided a perfect vehicle for stirring people's thoughts. Was God female? Our collusion with apartheid? Single parents? Was the virgin birth a fairy story? However, the article that rocked the community was suggesting that the local armaments workers had blood on their hands. There were calls for my resignation or sacking, but also support for my writing. I wanted to push boundaries, triggering the church's mother and toddler group to have to be renamed after attending as a dad. I encouraged the parish to welcome interfaith pilgrims, arranged a service for them in Rochester Cathedral, did a fun run for Bob Geldof's Feed the World. My interfaith work saw me arrange a pilgrimage from London to Moscow, with 50 young people from all the world's major faiths and from across the world. The Archbishop of Canterbury sent blessings and greetings for the pilgrimage.
A signal of great hope was given when spiritual leaders from the Buddhist, Baha'i, Muslim, Sikh, Jewish, Hindu and Christian faiths offered prayer, blew bubbles for peace. They acted as a reminder of our prayers rising to God. Our first peace plaque was presented to the Dean of Westminster, who received it on behalf of the Abbey. We ate our breakfast in a small Polish village. So began a day which became the darkest and most difficult of our journey. Some pilgrims were unable to enter the gates into Auschwitz, bewildered by what they saw and felt. Could we have any integrity in believing, in praying in such a place as this? Could we reconcile our journey of high and idealistic hopes when we were faced with this unavoidable horror? At their peak, the crematoria were burning up to 20,000 people a day. Everything appeared suspended, frozen, gross evil eclipsing all light and goodness. In the heavy silence there was no escape from the cries, the heartache, the tormenting truth. Here we had no right to speak of God, yet speak of God we must. We were implicated, and from guilt and emptiness we shared our prayers and our pain. We planted our seeds for a different world. By the last day, we were a transformed group of pilgrims, sisters and brothers of one family. We had glimpsed a new way of life, an enriching, inclusive, cooperative, joyful, laughing celebration of our differences, truly threads which had become woven together into a tapestry of peace.
Almost 50 young people from this country, representing no fewer than 12 religious faiths, have just been by bus across Europe to Moscow and back. The leader of their expedition was Jonathan Blake, and he's on the line now. Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, what was the purpose of this journey?
First, that we wanted to be good news. We wanted to gather a group of people from a very different set of backgrounds to show that we can actually work together in our diverse world for a common goal and the common good.
And we also wanted to change the lives of the people who took part, because they in time will be contributors or leaders in their own communities, and to give them right at the beginning of their lives a tremendous experience of interreligious cooperation bodes well for the future. To have a group of people on the memorial at Birkenau concentration camp, perhaps in tears, offering prayers from their different faith traditions, that the sort of devastation of the Holocaust should never happen again.
Well, as I said earlier, those peace pilgrims from 10 countries and 12 religious faiths returned recently from Moscow, and Jonathan Blake was the peace bus organiser.
We spent an afternoon at a village outside Prague called Lidice, which was entirely decimated by the Nazis. We stopped at the memorial to the children who died at Terezin and saw their poetry and the pictures they'd written before they died. We offered prayers at Auschwitz on the memorial to the 6 million Jewish people who died, each from our own faith tradition, in an act of unity, and hoped that such a thing would never happen again. We prayed at the tomb of the unknown soldier in Moscow, commemorating 20 million Russian dead. Bringing it right up to date, we prayed at the graveside of Jerzy Popieluszko in Warsaw in Poland, and then we stopped and prayed at Bergen-Belsen in West Germany. Signs perhaps of our desire as young people to try and build a world where we actually live together in peace and respect and prevent the sorts of atrocities that we witnessed during the last war. When I'd finished my university training, I went to India, to Calcutta for 1 year, and worked with Mother Teresa, and was exposed to a very different way of life, different culture, different faiths, living side by side in that city. And I saw how futile it seemed that so often people were competitive together, trying to push their own particular religion, instead of perhaps pooling the resources that they had to work together for the good of everybody. And I think over the years since then, I've become more and more convinced that Jesus' desire in coming was not to set up a whole nother religious structure, but to actually invite people to break down the barriers that divide us and to work together for love, for justice, for everybody, as a way of our discipleship expressing itself to God.
On my return as chaplain to St Bartholomew's Hospital in Rochester, the then oldest existing hospital in England, I opened the first National Health Service Interfaith Hospital Chapel, or Quiet Room as we called it. To the hospital secretary at St Bartholomew's Hospital, it was indeed like walking into a private church or chapel encompassing all faiths and telling me that we were all as one in the eyes of God. My sincere appreciation goes to those who created and care for this room. I was then appointed as vicar to St Martin's Church in Barnhurst. The press were intrigued by a vicar who had smuggled roubles to oppressed Christians, who urged his parishioners to cut up their credit cards, put rugs and toys in the church, to welcome children, held red-nose services for comic relief, and even got the bishop to come and support the ambulance strikers. I was a fun vicar too. I led processions through the streets, took humorous assemblies, filled the church with colourful banners, injected imagination into the festivals, played April Fool's jokes, offered green communion wine, got the fire brigade to stop a service on the pretext of a fire test, and was also quite happy taking my turn in the stocks. I continued to write provocatively, pointing out biblical myths and supporting women's ordination. However, it was writing that Jesus loved Saddam Hussein that caused a storm, as did my criticism of the Gulf War. I was arrested for a non-violent act of civil disobedience that involved me writing on a pillar by the Houses of Parliament the biblical quotation that the angel wrote on Nebuchadnezzar's palace, warning that his rule had been found wanting. It was the night when MPs were voting to support the Americans using their devastating B-52 bombers to destroy the young Iraqi recruits of the army gathering in the desert. The House of Bishops had also indicated their support. I was horrified and determined to demonstrate an alternative view. It created mayhem in the parish. They hadn't really encountered such a vicar before. And then my encouragement to the congregation that they too should protest provoked outrage. The press were fascinated and urged me to keep sharing my opinions. I also received an immense amount of support, both from parishioners and members of the public. The Catholic clergy wrote to me in solidarity, and Canon Oestreicher, the pacifist and human rights activist, contacted me. I was convicted of criminal damage and appealed the conviction on the grounds that the clergy of the established church had a responsibility to mediate God's messages to the Queen as head of the church. The High Court respected the argument, did not apply costs, but ruled that in doing so the clergy had to suffer the consequences of breaching the law. Having limited means, I had represented myself throughout. Once the furore about the Gulf had abated, I highlighted world poverty by living in a shanty town built outside the church, and supported a young man being court-martialed for going AWOL when due in the Gulf. I had flown to Pakistan, Moscow and Australia with my peace work, as well as being introduced to the Pope. I led the parish in achieving a £250,000 extension project. The diocese had wanted to pay the parish £20,000 for a strategic strip of land we owned, that was in fact worth £120,000. Tense negotiations resulted in them paying us £90,000, but not without knives being sharpened towards me. I raised much by obscuring the altar with bricks, removing them for each £250 donated. The church grew from a handful of worshippers to hundreds. I was the director of the Week of Prayer for World Peace, led a local interfaith group, and distributed interfaith materials to all diocesan clergy, in defiance of evangelical clergy that had voted to stop me. Again, in resistance to Anglican policy, I married divorcees. When my personal life hit difficulties and my marriage failed, those with knives connived to visit their vengeance. The bishop required me to take a break for counselling and reflection, and although I had devoted my life to the church, they left me without a home or an income. During the following 12 months, reflecting on how the crisis had been handled, I decided to leave the Church of England altogether and launched independently in October 1994. My pioneering new provision of ministry caught the public's imagination and met people's growing desire for individual choice. All the local media covered the story, the tabloids, and also The Guardian, The Independent, The Daily Telegraph and The Times.
But now you can go to church in your own home, courtesy of freelance Jonathan Blake, a former vicar from Kent who now enterprisingly offers a range of services.
Once you're ordained a priest, you're always a priest because your orders are indelible, which means because they're given by God, they can't be taken away as such. So I'm a priest offering my ministry now as a self-employed minister. Jesus having a very spontaneous and close relationship with the people around him, not in buildings and not surrounded by institutions and rules and regulations, but a very deep ministry based on friendship and the ability to respond to the needs that he found.
Yeah, when you think of it, if Jesus came along today, he'd probably be arrested.
Well, he certainly would be regarded, I think, as a nonconformist and somebody outside the walls of the institution. Yeah. Many people go to the local parish looking for the baptism of their babies, their christenings, and they're turned away. Lots of people have children who are unbaptised today.
The Church of England were caught off guard and resented my innovative approach, as did many local clergy. Details of my private difficulties were leaked to the press and resulted in typical tabloid nonsense. Their inaccurate and defamatory headlines and coverage were embarrassing and hurtful.
This from Matthew. This is the church where the Reverend Jonathan Blake preached before embarking on a career as Britain's first freelance vicar.
The congregation he inherited here in Barnhurst, Kent, back in 1988 was relatively small, but by the time he left 5 years later, the pews were filled. Many of the worshippers were women.
Ironically, it was the women that led to his downfall at St Martin's. The randy vicar today admitted falling into bed with a few of his flock. some have forgiven him.
I would say he's a very charismatic person. He enables many people to do things that they wouldn't have been able to do if he wasn't around. I don't agree with all that he does, but I can see there's a positive side to what he's doing.
Others, shocked by Jonathan's decision to conduct all kinds of oddball ceremonies, fear he could start a cult religion.
Because of his energy, flair and talent, he will actually draw men and women to him once they've been ministered by him. That's in baptisms or these wedding services he wants to do. I think they'll find a caring, committed person who will draw people towards him and they'll want to stay around him.
The Anglican Church seems happy to allow the Reverend Blake to continue his unorthodox services for now at least. But there is growing concern that this freelance vicar is doing the Christian faith more harm than good. Matthew Wright, The Little John Show.
Reverend Blake is with me now. Jonathan, good evening. Thank you for coming in. I see you described as a freelance minister. What is a freelance minister and why do we need one when we can get one for free from the local church?
Well, I think because the Church of England somehow over the years seems to have lost touch with the common person and the things that people want the church to provide today, but they're not. So they're going to the church for things like baptisms, weddings where they want them, and they're being turned away or told they can't have those things.
I can't believe that. I can't believe that they're being turned away from baptisms and marriages. We must offer something more exotic than that to be able to justify charging £30 an hour.
Well, it's extraordinary, and the listeners will verify this, but up and down the land, the church is becoming more and more selective about who it will accept and welcome for baptism. So you have families going to the church, wanting their babies baptised, perhaps they've had 2 baptised and they're going with a 3rd, and they're told, no, you're not regular churchgoers, you're not performing in the Christian way we expect you to, therefore we won't baptise your children.
Well, they certainly won't marry lesbians, but you're proposing to.
Well, that's another case in point. I offer on the whole a traditional vicar-type ministry, and I also cater for the alternative patterns of relationship that are well known in our society today. And that would include people in gay relationships. I think it's important to honour and respect love wherever it's found.
Where do you perform these ceremonies?
Well, one of the things that's attractive to people is that if you want to get married, whatever type of sexuality you have, it's either in the church or the registry office or there isn't anything at all. And what I'm saying is people are far more imaginative than that these days, and they want a ceremony where they want it. And that might be on the hilltop, in a sacred home, in their garden, in beautiful exotic settings. I want to provide the type of ceremony they want, expressing the sort of beliefs that they have in the way that they want it done.
It's not only the church that doesn't recognise these marriage ceremonies, neither is the law of the land.
Well, I think that there's a great problem that people today, in their experience of loving what's in their heart, are way ahead of the rules and the regulations of society and the church. And society and the church seem way behind very often. Well, in fact, the church is far further behind than society. And today, people are exploring and pioneering new ways of living, and I believe that there should be a ministry that responds to that.
Why did you resign from the church? Did you jump or were you pushed?
Well, I'd always had an uncomfortable ride in the church, I think, because I have a very liberal and expansive view, both to life generally and to matters of faith, and therefore I've always questioned, I've always pursued truth as far as I've understood it, I've always lived the sort of life that I think is important to live. That's often come up into conflict with the hierarchy and the expected pattern of living. Well, I think if somebody looked at my ministry as a whole, what they would see was somebody who brought a lot of happiness, healing and love to people's lives. I had a community which I turned completely over from being really in a very dying state to being vibrant, full of life, with 250,000 new building development, and lots of people giving good testimony to me. In the whole of my life, I believe in wholeness. I am the person I am, strong and weak and good and bad. And in that sense, I have a whole range of feelings, which are positive and negative.
Right. A lot of us said, yeah, Jonathan's a great man. He put bums on seats, he raised money. On the other hand, a lot of people have said the reason he put bums on seats because he's a very charismatic man. And they think there was a cult, maybe a cult of personality, but they were worried that beyond that you were establishing some sort of religious cult, in completely opposite to the Church of England. That this was going to be the Church of Jonathan rather than the Church of God.
Well, I very much distance myself from that, because what I believe is that the community is a community. Ever since I began, I've never put myself up on a pedestal. I've never enjoyed the deference that people give to vicars. People would say, oh, vicar this, vicar that. I say, don't call me vicar, I'm Jonathan, I'm an ordinary human being. And what I sought to create in the community was a church where people, whoever they were, however they behaved, whatever they believed, were welcome. And what was beautiful in the congregation is that it was full of very different sorts of people. Yes, strong, well-resourced, educated people, but also innocent people with handicaps and difficulties and disabilities.
Given that you are no longer part of the established church, do you think it's fair to continue to work with John Connor, the badge of office?
Well, yes, because what I represent is intrinsically what I believe Jesus to be about. If you look at Jesus' ministry, he wasn't in the walls of the establishment, he wasn't wearing, in a sense, fancy frocks and fancy buildings with respectable people. He did the very thing which was unconventional, that got up the noses of the authorities, that compromised conventions and broke traditions and broke church rules. He was somebody who was shocking and surprising in society. He was in people's homes where people didn't expect him. He did religious things where people didn't expect him. He surprised people with the fact that God was found in ordinary places. And that's the ministry that I seek to do. That's what I believe I'm called by God to do.
Jonathan Blake, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Back after the break.
But the integrity of my ministry and the groundswell of support it received could not be countered. Imaginative services in special locations were eagerly requested. The first, a renewal of vows for a dying man at Treculver Towers, just off the Kent coast. There was the first home baptism, as the Times called it, and in gardens, in a circus ring, on top of Mt Snowdon, in restaurants and pubs. Gay and lesbian weddings, and as though that in itself wasn't controversial enough at that time, one where one of the gay men wore a full white wedding dress, and another where the two women were serving soldiers, when gay love was forbidden in the army. I was the first cleric to advertise my willingness to take gay weddings in Gay Times and in Diva, the magazine for lesbians. There were even plans for weddings in outer space. The Church were not happy at the success of this new provision of ministry, and continued their dirty tricks. They published articles disassociating the Church from me, and wrote to all the local undertakers instructing them not to use me. They bad-mouthed me when members of the public inquired about me, wrote to bodies with whom I was associated suggesting I be removed from my responsibilities. Repeatedly I had to threaten or take legal action against them, but their sour politics could not prevent the joy and authenticity of my ministry receiving public acclaim and support. Then Libby Purvis invited me as a guest on her respected and long-standing midweek Radio 4 programme.
What the Home Office seems to feel about Ben is not really that dissimilar to the way the Church of England feels about the Reverend Jonathan Blake here, who is an independent priest now. John, you have this brochure offering baptisms, weddings, funerals, communion, anointing, confession, counselling, right down to school assemblies and pet funerals. The brochure shows you glossily in an embroidered cope and at the communion table looking photogenic, and it's full of these testimonials from clients, everything except a price list. This is an extraordinary new profession, isn't it? A freelance priest for hire.
Well, what it provides for people is the opportunity to express a faith which is very genuine to them in a way that is authentic to them. And very often today, I think that the Church of England or the established churches have stolen the practice of the faith from ordinary people. And when ordinary people go, the church expects them to fit in with the particular way they package religion. And often people end up either rejected, sent away, or very hurt by their experience of that. And yet they have a very genuine faith. And when the Church of England or other churches say that they're non-Christians or non-believers, they protest. They say, no, we are, very much so, but we don't like what you're providing, but we're looking for something different.
But you set fees, though. I mean, you have to set fees for counselling or whatever. I mean, does that not stand uncomfortably with the traditional profession of priest?
Well, not particularly, because the Church of England provides very well for its clergy, and there are fees for the services that the church offers anyway. What I have to do, I work entirely on a self-employed basis, so I try and work out flexibly a scale of fees for the work that I do. But I've got the flexibility as well to respond to people if they can't afford those fees, and I do services for nothing or for what people can afford. So there's that the important part of my work is not the fees, it's not a business, it's a ministry, and I feel I'm most completely fulfilling my priesthood, freed from the shackles of all the rules and the petty regulations of an institution that I believe has stopped practising the gospel of love.
Now, let's go into how it happened. You started out conventionally, you were a theology student, a serious young man.
Yes, I was.
Yes.
I worked traditionally for 12 years within the Church of England.
You had a spell out in Calcutta, with Mother Teresa.
Yes, I went out to work there during after my university training and before my theological training. And that was a very formative, powerful experience because I lived and worked with the very poorest people in the slums of the city, became very ill and experienced many things which changed my own life and my own thinking, my understanding of the faith.
How did it strike you? I mean, did it change the way you thought about people and about life and about ministry?
Yes, very, very much so, because I think when you're brought up within a particular educational sphere and culture in England, you come across many people who think that their culture, their practice of the faith is the only way and it's the sole deposit of truth. When you're exposed to a culture, a world of people, all of whom treasure their own experience and their own life, you begin to realise that it's a folly to think that your own particular experience is the only way. So it gave me the understanding and the insight to see the treasure of life in everybody and in their faith and in their approach to life and see bridges between all of us.
Now, you were a curate back home in various parishes and a vicar in Bexley Heath, and you were one of these sort of pretty radical sort of crusading vicars. You built a shanty town and street sleeping near your church as a demonstration of how a lot of the world has to live, and you took a peace bus to Moscow and so on. But all that can be done right inside the Church of England. I mean, there's a lot of the things that you were doing as a radical young curate and radical young vicar are not that different to what other people do. What drove you out then? What drove you out of the system?
Well, I think my experience personally was that I felt I was dying. It was claustrophobic working with an institution that I do believe had lost its focus of being able to flexibly and spontaneously respond to people and the different situations that they were in. And very often people would come to me looking for ministry and either because of the rules of the church or the pettiness, the prejudices of the congregation, you weren't able to respond to that.
What sort of things did you have to not respond to?
Well, many people, if they go for a baptism to their local church, are turned away, or they're given an obstacle course through which they have to pass before they're allowed to have the baptism. If they come to you as a refugee from another parish, the system says that you're not allowed to.
By the obstacle course, you mean that the parents have to have some form of instruction rather than just have the baptism as a decorative service?
Sometimes attend the church for every week for 6 months or go through a quite onerous educational course.
Fair enough, really, isn't it? If you're being baptised into a church, into a religion, it's not just a sort of cosmetic thing. I mean, people do use the Church of England, do try and use the church constantly for marriages because the building's pretty and christenings because it's nice to have a christening.
Well, I think
the church just happens to insist on some rigour to it, doesn't it?
Well, I think that's the polemic that the church puts across. I think it's fallacious because my experience is people have a very real and living faith and they can articulate that. What they don't think is right is being coerced into expressing that in the particular way the Church of England requires, which is much more about an institutional church requiring adherence to its particular way of approaching faith. And it's not about the spirit of faith and belief that lives really in the hearts and lives of the people of this country. And that's
But you're saying that anybody can design their own faith and hire a minister to minister to it. I mean, but where do you draw the line? I mean, will you, for instance, do you conduct gay weddings?
I certainly conduct gay weddings, but my experience is that of my ministry, 95% of it is entirely conventional, both in terms of its practice, although it happens in unusual settings, and in terms of its Christian content. So it's not that people have an alternative faith as such, or something that wouldn't be within the umbrella of Christendom. What they don't like is being forced to actually express it in the particular language, particular ways and habits of one approach, which is the institutional churches.
So you'll do things that a conventional church wouldn't do, like pet funerals, gay weddings, weddings of divorced people and so on. Where do you draw the line?
Well, what I would reiterate is that the majority, over 95% of my ministry, is traditional baptism ministry to traditional weddings for heterosexual couples. It's a very ordinary approach to life.
You could do those inside the church. It's the things you can do outside the church, which are interesting.
But that's where you're mistaken. You couldn't, because the church requires that the services happen in the building.
because it wants to centre its power and its focus on its own clubhouse. And the fact is that people don't want that. They want to have services in their gardens, in their homes, in castles, in beautiful settings, in places of spiritual or emotional significance to them. And that sort of broad-ranged and free and flexible approach to ministry, which gives people the chance to put together a service where they want, how they want, and the content that they want, is not available in the church.
Why do you hang on to the old C of E trappings then? There's an amazing picture on your brochure of you in this embroidered cope with gold bits on. You're hanging on to the outward semblance. Why do you have to do that?
I don't think I'm doing that. What I'm doing is rescuing the symbols of the faith, which are the cultural heritage of the people of this country, and giving people access to them again. Because what the Church of England has done, or the institutional churches are, is that they've stolen those and actually hidden them, imprisoned them within particular systems, particular buildings, particular routines. And I'm saying, no, those symbols, that faith, is available for everyone. And the fact that people want to express their faith and to have very meaningful services, but in ways and in places that mean something to them, is at the heart of my faith. And that, in a sense, is essentially what Jesus and the disciples calls the revolution of their own faith to do.
What on earth did your bishop say when you said, I'm going freelance? I'm getting out, but I'm still going to call myself a priest and wear a cope. I mean, was there a moment at which you said, look, I'm off?
Well, there was a lot of thought went into how I did this, and after taking advice, talking about it with family and friends, what I did was to make the decision to actually cut all my legal and institutional ties with the Church of England, because that was, in a sense, fair to them. It was also fair to me, because what it made very clear to the public was that I wasn't attached to a denominational base.
But this doesn't
unpriest
you, as it were. This doesn't unfrock you. You can cut the tie without unfrocking yourself.
No, once you're a priest, you retain the character of your priesthood forever, because the priesthood is something that's given to you by God, recognised by the Church, and that's the thing that people respond to, and the reason they come to me for services. But it gives people the chance to experience faith in that fresh and revitalised way that was experienced when the disciples and the Jesus came up against the institution of Judaism and actually made faith again available along the hilltops and in the villages in a completely new and refreshing way. And somehow, over the course of history, that's become frozen, paralysed and institutionalised again in this terrible system of faith that we have that's lost the focus of love.
There is a certain safety in the existence of an institution, though, isn't there? I mean, I am quite prepared to accept that you're a good person doing a good ministry, but you must see that there are great risks in individuals with no institution or authority over them giving sacraments and religious instruction on this sort of private basis. I mean, there could be terrible abuses, couldn't there?
Well,
we like even our psychiatrists to belong to professional institutions which can zap them if they do bad things, don't we?
I accept very much the concept of accountability, and I actually believe I'm more accountable now doing the work I do, both basically to the public with whom I'm working, because if I was doing something awry, there would soon be protest because I'm doing a pioneering form of ministry.
Oh, I see we're going to meet Britain's first privatised vicar now. He's a C of E Catholic and he's gone freelance. But first, how viewers are going to see him in an ITV documentary tomorrow night.
On 3D tonight, the freelance priests who are taking religion outside the church. Freelance priests are offering alternative services at competitive rates. But are they ministers of God or mere mavericks?
This priest is preparing to baptize a baby.
In the name of God.
But this baptism is taking place at a terraced house in Rochester. Jonathan Blake used to be a Church of England vicar. Now he sells his services at an hourly rate. Baptisms, weddings and funerals are all on offer, as well as pet blessings and some more controversial services.
I offer to people the full range of services that perhaps a traditional vicar would offer. I do a number of different things that the Church of England will find difficult. I'm very open to marrying people who've been divorced. I also do weddings for people who are gay and in gay relationships and alternative relationships, I think my brochure puts it.
Jonathan's brochure and his adverts in magazines like Vogue have attracted some unusual clients.
I've done a baptism which was absolutely wonderful in the circus, when all the circus family turned up. I've done a wonderful wedding on a speedboat down in the English Channel. Basically, I will now do for people whatever they want. And if they want, in a sense, a secular wedding, an atheist wedding, or a religious wedding, it's totally up to them.
Lynn McCartney's children were all baptised at home by Jonathan. Lynn's religious and had wanted them baptised in church, but was put off by the attitude of the vicar.
When the vicar came, he was adamant that I had to give up working on a Sunday. We had to go to church for 6 weeks previous to the christening, that the godparents would have to come and be interviewed after we'd chosen them, and his actual words were, once we baptise Lauren, if we don't see you regularly in church thereafter, don't bother coming back with any more children.
As a vicar, Jonathan had always been something of a maverick.
I don't think I've ever been a traditional curate or a traditional priest or a traditional vicar. I think I've always been perhaps something of a square peg in a round hole, or the other way around. The conservative churchgoer found my approach to faith perhaps quite threatening. I think there was a divide between those who were traditional in Annecy and those who were perhaps new and were encouraged and excited by it. I love it when I put on my most beautiful robe, because I love the sense that ordinary people in their front rooms now have access to the beauty of religious symbols and religious vestments. They can see them, they knit them, they can touch them. God gives you your status as a priest, and the church recognises that gift, but because God has given it, the church can never take it away.
And here he is, the Reverend Jonathan Blake, in full regalia. You look very splendid since you've been in our studio. Thank you very much. You were a proper church sort of vicar, doing all the church stuff in church. Why did you leave?
Well, that's basically because when I was a vicar, I became increasingly frustrated that the church had lost touch with the ordinary person. And the people were coming to me as a vicar, coming to the church for ministry, ordinary things like baptisms that they wanted, or people who'd been divorced who wanted to be married, and the church wasn't offering them what they wanted.
Right, so you left your ministry, you resigned, and you're freelance basically, you're a privatised vicar, as I said, I mean you're literally that.
The church often names people who don't go to the church as non-Christian. What I've found in the practice of my ministry is that people have a very real faith, deep convictions, a great sense of spirituality. They want a priest, they want a minister of God to come and perform a wedding for them or a baptism in their home, but they don't like the particular way it's packaged by the Church of England at the moment.
Some people find it too starchy, too stuffy, too formal.
Starchy, it's out of touch, it's boring, it doesn't relate to their everyday needs, it's not in touch with who they are as people.
Do you insist that there is a large part of God, as it were, in the service? I mean, it's not completely detached from religion.
Well, one of the things I found quite difficult as a vicar was that often you were involved in forcing religion or a particular version of religion onto people. And I respect very much the people that I work with and the beliefs that they have. And what I want to do as a priest is to help them express what's valuable for them. And for most people, that does include God a large amount.
You did a baptism in a wine bar, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I've done most baptisms in people's homes or gardens, but I've done some of them in pubs and some in wine. One a couple of weeks ago in wine bar in Covent Garden.
I've done a funeral,
I do a lot of funerals. Yeah, I've got the crematorium in Sanctuary Chapel.
And good to see you, Vicar. And so we have vestments for travel, really. If you ring us up, if you want to book him, we'll let you know the number. We're taking a break.
Some people think that the church, with its buildings, rules and regulations, just gets in the way. That's why the Reverend Jonathan Blake has become a freelance vicar. He's gone solo.
Emergency. What service do you require? He's on his way.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Blake.
The freelance ministry for life's little emergencies.
I like unusual requests because that's perhaps what I'm trying to cater for. I had a lovely call that came in the other evening with a family who in fact had married. They were hoping for a baptism in a pub. And it seemed to me that was a wonderful mixing of images and metaphors. Hello, Jonathan Blake speaking. I've been asked to take weddings in woods and stately homes and restaurants. Yes, a hotel would be a marvellous setting. If you look at how Jesus practiced his ministry, he believed in meeting people on the streets and in the marketplaces, finding the needs that they had, finding where they were at and responding appropriately.
The national and local press, radio stations and primetime TV had featured my pioneering approach to ministry. I became inundated with requests for services and travelled throughout the country as well as to Menorca, Crete, Ibiza, France and Morocco. A new yet truly apostolic approach to ministry had emerged, flexible, loving, inclusive and relevant. Instead of intriguing the main denominations and exciting their interest, they responded defensively. However, the spiritual cat of renewal was out of the bag, and there was no looking back. Part 2 will cover how this social and ecclesiastical revolution continued.